Hi everyone, my name is Christina Limbach. I'm with Sweatshop Hot Yoga Studio in Oconomowoc, Wisconsin. And today we're going to break down Sun Salutation A. It's a very common flow or sequence that you'll find in a lot of yoga classes, including vinyasa flow classes, power yoga classes, and things of that sort. So we'll break down the sequence by going pose by pose and talk about proper form in the different poses. A lot of them are very common in yoga, such as downward facing dog, upward facing dog, mountain pose, high and low plank. So we'll look at each of those foundational yoga poses and again, make sure that we have proper form and we're doing what works for our bodies. And we'll do a couple of rounds of sun salutation, and then our very last one will coordinate our breath to movement, and you guys will see what that's all about. So we'll meet you on your mats. All right, sun salutation A starts in mountain pose. So in mountain pose, you want to face the front of your mat. Your shoulders should be back and low. For me, it helps to do a small roll of my shoulders forward and then place them back. That helps open up your hands to the front of your mat, palms facing outward, thumbs facing to your sides with a thumbs up. And you want to stand nice and tall here. So you can imagine that there's a string from the top of your head pulling you upward, standing nice, tall, and proud. And you can be standing with your big toes touching and heels about an inch apart. In this pose, although we're just standing here, we do want our core, our quads, and our glutes engaged. That's going to help us have the nice, strong, tall pose. And your gaze can be shifted slightly upward, or you can even have your eyes closed. This is mountain pose. From here, we'll bring our arms overhead. So in this pose, we want our palms facing each other. You can slightly rotate your pinkies inward. And again, your shoulders should be hanging low. So you don't want them hunched up by your ears, but nice and relaxed and low here. We'll continue engaging our core, quads, and glutes to have that nice, strong pose, and remembering to lift up from the crown of our heads. Our next pose is a forward fold. There's a couple of different ways that we can get there, so I'll show you two variations that are pretty common. The important thing with our forward fold is to hinge at the hips. So when you forward fold, you don't want to send your hips backward to make yourself fold, but hips as stationary as possible, hinging at the hips for your forward fold. So two ways that we can get there is one, bring your hands to your heart right in front of your chest, and then hinge at your hips until your hands can reach the mat and your crown faces the ground. So that's one way. The other way, starting from hands overhead, is to swan dive forward. So you just bring your arms out to your sides and again hinge at the hips until your hands reach the ground in front of you and your crown faces the ground. So since we're hinging from the hips here, we want our backs as flat as possible. It's very common to round your back here. You know, I have a little bit of back rounding as well. Something to alleviate some of that is maybe take a slight bend in your knees here to reduce some of the tension in your lower back. You want your upper half of your body to hang nice and long here, stretching out and decompressing the spine. This can feel really good for those of us who spend a lot of time at a computer. It just helps lengthen and again decompress our spine. From here, we will halfway lift. So bring your back into a flat position. You can be maybe higher, lower, whatever that looks like for you, as long as your back is flat. Resting the palms of your hands on your shins, and your gaze can be to the mat, slightly in front of your toes. This is our halfway lift. From here, we're going to move into high to low plank. Once we coordinate our breath to movement, high to low plank is all one slow and fluid motion, but I will break it down step by step so that we can see what we should be looking out for in each phase of that pose. So from our halfway lift, we'll bring our hands back down to the mat in front of us, and we will put our hands flat with our fingers spread nice apart. What I like to do is I like to have my pointer fingers parallel to each other, and then just make sure that I'm spreading out the rest of my fingers as much as possible. So hands to the mat with our index fingers facing parallel. And then we'll just put our weight into our hands as we step our feet backwards. This is high plank. We want to make sure that we have our shoulders protracted, so we're pushing the earth away from us, not sinking down into our shoulders. And we want to make sure that our back has as straight of a line as possible. In this pose, it is okay to bring your knees to the floor. So if that feels better for you, please feel free to take that movement. In high plank, you want to make sure that you're engaging your core. That will help you stabilize and hold your plank. And our next pose that we'll flow into, which is again kind of the same, it's called chaturanga. So it's high plank to low plank, mix up the chaturanga. And to get into low plank, we will bend our elbows backward. And in the full expression, we don't have to have our bodies completely, hovering an inch above the ground, but we just want our elbows to be bent at a 90-degree angle with our biceps parallel to the mat. So I'll show you guys what that looks like here. So high plank, going to bend my elbows backward. My biceps should be parallel to the ground, elbows 90-degree angle. And then we're going to lift our chest forward into upward facing dog. In upward facing dog, we want our thighs to be lifted off of the mat. Your feet should be flat against the mat, and pulling your heart forward with your eyes set to the sky. If you'd like, in upward facing dog, you can rest your thighs on the ground. If you do that, I would recommend a slight bend in your arms here to make sure that you're not putting too much pressure on your back. So you want to protect that lower back with a slight bend in the arms here. And you can still pull your heart forward and look up to the sky. So from our upward facing dog, we're going to curl our toes under and push our hips back into downward facing dog. In our downward facing dog, you can maybe pedal out your feet a little bit, walk your dog, maybe loosen up those hamstrings a little bit. I like to rise up onto my tippy toes and take a few bends in my knees. In downward facing dog, again, we want to make sure that we're hinging at our hips with as flat as back as possible. So maybe the best way for you to do that is to bend your knees, and that will help you hinge forward from your hips a little more. And your head should be hanging low in line with your biceps. From upward facing dog, we'll travel to the top of our mat. The two most common ways to do that is to simply walk to the top of your mat or to do a little hop. So I'll show you guys the hop here. If you're going to hop, you'll want to slightly bend your knees, shift your gaze in front of your hands, and you'll push with your feet and pull your body with your hands and core. And from here, we're going to forward fold. So crown of the head facing the ground, hinging from our hips. And we'll halfway lift with our flat back, palms of our hands resting against our shin. Your gaze can be at the top of your mat here to help you with your balance. And again, in this pose, your big toe should be touching with about an inch of space between your back heels. And from here, we can rise all the way up to arms overhead and come back down to mountain pose. So that was our first sun salutation A. Awesome job. We're going to do it one more time, a little bit quicker, and then our third and final time we'll coordinate breath to movement. So again, we'll start at the top of our mat with our big toes touching and heels about an inch apart. Roll your shoulders back to bring them nice, low, and relaxed. Palms facing the front of our mat with our thumbs pointing outward. And stand up nice, tall, and proud. We'll bring our hands overhead, palms facing each other, shoulders low, engaging our core, quad, and glutes to stand nice and strong. From here, we'll forward fold. I like to bring my hands to my heart, hinge at my hips, and bring my hands to the mat. And lastly, the crown of my head facing the ground. You can bend your knees here if you'd like. That might feel a little bit better for you if you have tight hamstrings. And from here, we'll forward fold. So back's nice and straight, hands resting on the shins. You always want to avoid putting pressure on your knees. So if you're a little higher up to have a flat back, don't put your hands on your knees. Either extend your arms and maybe your tips of your fingers on your shins here, or you can even place them on your thighs. So forward fold, and then we'll move pretty quickly from high to low plank as it is all one movement. So hands to the mat with our pointer fingers parallel, fingers spread wide. We'll step our feet back here with our shoulders protracted and a flat back in high plank. Bend our elbows backward into low plank. Tops of our feet can touch the mat. And pull your heart forward for upward facing dog. You can look to the sky and extend through your back. I curl my toes back under and then push my hips up to the sky for my downward facing dog. I do like to bend my knees a little bit here because that helps me hinge at my hips and keep a flat back rather than rounding. And from here, we'll travel to the top of our mat before we hopped to the top of our mat. So we'll just take a little walk this time. And forward fold once we're here with the crown of our head facing the ground. Maybe a slight bend in the knees if that's what your body likes and wants. And forward fold with our hands to our shins. Again, in this position, I like to look at the top of my mat. It just helps me focus and remember to breathe. And lastly, we'll rise up with our hands overhead, palms facing each other, shoulders low, and bring our arms down back to mountain pose. So that was our second round of Sun Salutation A. We're going to go for the third round, and in this one, we will coordinate our breath to movement. So it'll be a little bit faster pace. If you'd like, you're welcome to do it a little quicker or a little slower than myself. It's all about yourself and your breath and what feels good for your body. So I'll have you guys join me. We'll start in mountain pose. And before we get started, I'm just going to have us take a few deep breaths here. You can inhale through your nose and exhale through your mouth. So we'll breathe in. Breathe out. You can close your eyes here if you'd like. Breathe in. Breathe out. And one more breath together. Breathe in. And breathe out. All right, here we go. Inhale, hands overhead. Exhale, forward fold, hinging at your hips. Halfway lift. Exhale, hands to your mat. And all in one motion is high to low plank on your exhale. Inhale, upward facing dog. Exhale, downward facing dog. All in one movement, we're going to inhale, Travel to the top of our mat and forward fold with our crowns facing the ground. Halfway lift. And all the way to hands overhead. Awesome. So great job, you guys, on Sun Salutation A. The last round was a little bit slower, so if you want to try that again, we're going to do it just one more time for fun. So mountain pose, we'll inhale, hands overhead. Exhale, forward fold. Inhale, halfway lift. All in one breath on our exhale, we're going to chaturanga, high to low plank. Inhale, upward facing dog. Exhale, downward facing dog. All in one inhale, travel to the top of your mat and forward fold. Exhale, halfway lift. And inhale, hands overhead. All right, thank you guys so much for joining me today, and we'll see you next time. Bye.